driving at the crossroads of history and myth, born in the nomadic camps under the eternal blue sky, and passed down through generations around the warmth of Gur fires, is Mongolian folklore. These old stories, from the grand epics of hero Khans to witty animal fables, form a cultural backbone as expansive as the steppe itself. In the old tradition of Mongolia, entertainment and education intertwine. Singers recount ancestral legends at festivals and weddings, imparting values and identity with each performance. Listeners young and old are transported by the rhythmic verse and song-like chants, learning of those fearless heroes of the old times, clever tricksters, sacred mountains, and the spiritual forces that shape the very land itself. So today, we are going to take a look into the interesting tapestry of Mongolian folklore, all the way from the ancient roots to the modern retellings. We'll talk about shamanic legends and Buddhist parables and how they became interwoven into Mongolia's stories, and of course how folklore continues to shape Mongolian identity and pride today. It's quite fascinating, and I invite you to come with me. Step into the world of Mongolian folklore. But let's have the customary welcome first. Anyone who's new to the channel, hello. Here we are. Well, if you would like to click the subscribe button, you'll certainly get more videos like this. And by the way, I'm not sure if you're here from the folklore playlist or any of the other playlists, but whichever way you came here, you can be assured that you can enjoy this 100% uninterrupted. It's all ad-free from start to finish, and that is because we are supported by the kind contributions on Patreon, YouTube memberships, and we also have a merch store, a super thanks donations here on YouTube, and a PayPal direct donation. That is how we keep the lights on here, so thank you very much for supporting. And if you'd like to become part of that prestigious group, well, you may check the pinned comment, video description, or the channel description, and you'll find where you need to go if you want to go there. But most importantly for now, let's just enjoy the video together, shall we? Mongolian folklore. Been looking forward to this one for a while. Long before Mongolians had a written language, they wove their beliefs, history, and values into oral narratives. Now, the earliest surviving written account of Mongol origins, the 13th century chronicle The Secret History of the Mongols, opens not with dry facts, but it actually opens with a mythic genealogy. Quote, "At the beginning, there was a blue-gray wolf, born with his destiny ordained by heaven above. His wife was a beautiful fallow doe." Now this legendary wolf and deer became the forebears of the Mongolian people, linking the Mongols' very ancestry to the sacred power of Tengri, the eternal blue sky. By claiming that the Mongols sprang from a union of a sky-sent wolf and a doe at the headwards of the Onon River and the sacred Burkhan Khaldun mountain, the tale sacralizes the Mongol homeland and suggests that the Mongol nation was destined by heaven from its very inception. Well, it's origin myths like this, preserved in the epic chronicle, that reveal how shamanic cosmology shaped early Mongolian identity. And then we have the shamanic worldview, which we call Tengrism, and within this the great blue sky and Mother Earth kind of act as divine parents of nature and all life. Going back to reference the secret history of the Mongols, though it is a historical narrative of Geser Khan's lineage and life, freely incorporates folklore and myth alongside fact. It includes folklore tale elements and genealogical legends, epics, proverbs, and even the occasional shamanic vision within the text. And this shows how inseparable oral law was from Mongolian historical consciousness. Even in the official history, myth and legend carried the truth of divine favor and destiny. The Mongols' nomadic existence fostered a robust oral tradition as the primary means of preserving knowledge. With no permanent settlements and early writing systems pretty much absent to record any culture, stories had to be, well, passed down by word of mouth across the grasslands. Professional bards and common herders alike would memorize these long narratives, ensuring continuity of culture through eras of migration and upheaval. By the 12th and 13th centuries, when Geser Khan forged the Mongol Empire, these oral traditions were already quite ancient. Knowing how far back they go is a little difficult. In fact, it is said that Geser Khan himself valued and patronized traditional singers and shamans who preserved tribal legends and the sayings of the ancestors. Many proverbs attributed to Geser Khan, extolling virtues like loyalty, unity, and courage, have been passed down as part of folklore. And even today, Uliger, that is, oral tales about Geser Khan's wisdom and his famed horses are recited, keeping his memory and lessons alive in folk culture. The blending of history and legend in such tales means that Mongolian folk narratives often serve a kind of double purpose, you see, recounting historical events in larger-than-life fashion and imparting moral or cosmological meaning to those events. But over the centuries, Mongolia's folklore didn't just remain static. It absorbed new influences as the region's religious landscape evolved. You see, in the pre-Buddhist era, Mongolian myths and folk tales were dominated by shamanistic themes, ancestral spirits, nature deities, sky gods. Let's take one example. One legend from the secret history tells of Alan Ko'ar, an ancestral mother figure, who after her husband's death mysteriously bore children said to be fathered by a shining golden spirit from the sky. In this tale, Alan Ko'ar demonstrates to her older sons the importance of unity by comparing them to arrow shafts, equally broken one by one, but unbreakable when bundled together. Reminds me of the joke from The Simpsons about the bundle of sticks, which I can't really repeat on here. Well, she then reveals that a radiant being, often interpreted as a Tengri spirit, entered her ger each night in the beam of light, impregnating her, a story that frames her younger sons as sons of heaven, and establishes divine favor in that family line. This is pretty powerful as a folk tale, I think. It's embedded in a quasi-historical narrative, too. It shows how shamanic folklore imparted social values like unity and legitimized leadership by claiming a heavenly, divine lineage. It also shows that entertaining flair of Mongolian storytelling, even a lesson on fraternity, is delivered via a vivid, magical anecdote of arrows and sky-born visitors, a prevailing theme that we'll see as we move along. Now, speaking of moving along, in the 16th and 17th centuries, there was a major shift that occurred, and that was Tibetan Buddhism spreading among the Mongols, blending with the native shamanism. But rather than erasing the old beliefs and completely taking over, Buddhism often interwove with them, and it produced new and syncretic folklore. Lamas, that is, Buddhist monks, appropriated popular story motives to teach Buddhism, while the populace reinterpreted Buddhist concepts through their own animistic and shamanistic lens. So this period gave rise to what scholars call yellow shamanism, essentially Lamaism, using the shamanic form. Do remember that the Tibetan Buddhism form is the yellow hat sect. That's what they call it. New creation myths appeared that attributed cosmic acts to Buddhist figures. For example, one Mongol myth said that at the dawn of time, a lama came down to the primordial ocean, stirring it with an iron rod to form the earth, wind, and fire. Another tale describes the Buddha Sakyamuni himself piercing a golden frog to create land, in a clear attempt to merge Buddhist cosmology with indigenous motifs. These Buddhist-influenced creation stories date from the 1600s, when the Mongols, under the influence of the Gelugpa, that is the Yellow Hat sect we mentioned, sought to align their origin narratives with their new faith. At the same time, many older shamanistic legends were preserved by being reinterpreted in more Buddhist terms. For instance, ancestral sky spirits might be recast as Buddhist devas, or folk heroes given roles as Buddhist saints or protectors. The once fearsome shamanic spirits and nature gods were not discarded, but more often absorbed as wrathful Buddhist protector deities in folk narratives. And we have a pretty vivid example of that. The war god, Jamsaran. Originally a Mongol deity of war, he was incorporated into the Buddhist pantheon as a Dharma protector, and folk stories continue to portray him as a fierce red warrior god, riding fiercely into battle. So in this way, the folklore became a repository of layered religious symbolism, where Tengri and Buddha might comfortably share the same stage together. And the result, after all those years, is a folklore that is richly syncretic. By the time Mongolia's oral literature began to be systematically collected and written down, that is the 18th and 19th centuries, it contained echoes of many eras: ancient animistic myth, hero sagas from the imperial age, and Buddhist morals introduced by monks. 17th century chronicles like Erdeni Yin Topchi from 1662 and Altan Topchi, compiled by learned nobles and lamas, consciously united Buddhist and Genghis Khan traditions, that is, Chingisid in their language. Now, these works blended the sacred history of Buddhism with the legendary tales and legacy of Genghis, effectively canonizing folklore and legend as a part of official history. But they preserved not only the memory of Genghis Khan's deeds, but also the legends and prophecies surrounding him. In essence, a fusion of political history with mythical narrative. And such chronicles and the thriving oral tradition in the countryside reinforced each other by honoring Genghis Khan and other heroes in both written chronicles and oral epics. Mongolians ensured that their folklore continued to shape national consciousness, even after the post-medieval era and that golden age of Mongol power. But one of the most intriguing aspects is how shamanic and Buddhist elements weave together, you see, and that reflects Mongolia's spiritual journey. You see, in its foundation, Mongolian folklore is deeply animistic, while traditional tales portray a world alive with spirits. Every mountain, river, every tree has its own Ezid, that is a master spirit, and great shamans mediate between humans and the spirit world. Animals often speak and act like humans in these stories, symbolizing that close relationship between nature and the nomads who live among it. For example, the wolf in folk tales represents hunger and the harsh realities of survival on the steppe, whereas the fox embodies sly cleverness. The hare or the hedgehog stands for wit or wisdom. Well, such animal characters are thought to carry the sarcastic and humorous side of human beings, acting out these moral lessons in a kind of allegory. These motives clearly stem from the shamanic belief in animal spirits and totemic ancestors. Recall the blue wolf, ancestor of the Mongols, and they make the frequent appearances in parables and fables. In shamanic lore, heroes often receive guidance or blessings from the sky or ancestral spirits. Folktales also abound of shamans, who can transform into animals or heroes granted powers by heaven. Even the great Geser Khan's life is surrounded by omens in folklore. One famous story holds that when he was born, the baby Temujin, that was his old name, clutched a blood clot in his fist, a traditional sign of a person who was destined to be a great warrior. And there was another legend too from the secret history that recounts how Korchi, a trusted retainer, had a vision from a sky spirit, Zaharin Tengri, prophesizing Temujin's future rule. These elements show how shamanic mythology is woven into Mongolian heroic narratives, certainly affirms that the protagonist is chosen by a supernatural force. It's funny how that's so pervasive across the folklore and religions of so many cultures. Really is a prevailing theme. Well, with the integration of Buddhism starting in the 16th century, new layers of meaning were added to the folklore. Rather than replacing the old stories, though, Buddhism just piggybacked on them. Mongolian oral storytellers created folk tales and legends to localize the Buddhist concepts, and one striking form this took was the rise of miracle tales about Buddhist images and relics. As Buddhism spread, certain statues of Buddhas or Bodhisattvas in Mongolia gained reputations for being alive, or at least magically powerful. Stories began to spread that these sacred images had minds of their own, moving, speaking, things like that, signaling their divine favor, that's for sure. For instance, legends say that some revered statues refused to allow themselves to be carried away from Mongol lands. In one case, a famous statue became impossibly heavy when foreign conquerors tried to remove it, only to become light again when returned home. These stories served to indigenize Buddhism in Mongolia, tying the faith to Mongolian soil and authority. Each story explained why a holy image chose to stay with a particular Mongol tribe or at a particular monastery, thereby empowering that locality as a sacred site and guaranteeing the community prosper. Another example of interweaving is how epic heroes and monsters were reinterpreted under Buddhism. The Mongolian epic tradition already featured its own heroes battling multi-headed giants and evil spirits, figures known as mangyus, essentially ogres or demons in folk belief. Don't quite think of them like the Japanese oni, they're a little bit different. Well, after Buddhism, these enemies in the epics were easily equated with Buddhist demons or adversaries. Meanwhile, the epic heroes might receive aid not only from shamanic spirits, but also from the bodhisattvas or Buddhist gods. The great epic Geser Khan is a prime example of that. Quite a telling case, you see, originally emanating from Tibetan and Central Asian lore. The epic of King Geser reached the Mongols and the Buryats by the 18th century, and was quickly embraced as part of the Mongolian folklore tradition. In the Tibetan Buddhist version, however, King Geser is an incarnation of a divine being sent to fight evil and protect the Dharma. Mongolian bards adopted Geser into their repertoire, Mongolizing the epic, I suppose. They kept its core of superhuman heroes battling demons and monsters, but localized the names and the settings, and often emphasized shamanic elements like spirit journeys. Thus, Geser became simultaneously a Buddhist hero and a Mongolian folk hero at the same time, transmitted in the alliterative verses of the Mongol oral style. The same occurred with the Oirat Mongols' great epic, Jangar. While largely being a secular heroic saga of a fantasy kingdom, over time versions of Jangar began to include Buddhist symbols and even references to the cycle of rebirth, reflecting the storyteller's very obviously Buddhist background. Scholars note that Oirat epics like Jangar in the 18th century developed Buddhist ideas and themes, showing the blending of the two religious traditions. Conversely, Buddhism in Mongolia took on shamanic colors too. Mongolian Buddhist practices incorporated music, dance, and chanting reminiscent of shamanistic rites, and this is mirrored in folklore as well. Folk legends about historical lamas often ascribe to them shaman-like magical feats. Let's take, for example, like vanquishing local ghosts and making it rain, just controlling the weather, that kind of thing. And that effectively turned pious monks into wonder-working heroes in the popular imagination. No pressure when a monk shows up to a village asking for food. Oh, great. While you're here, could you, make it rain for us? Someone has some explaining to do, I suppose. Of course, but in the old stories, the Lama might subdue a dangerous native spirit or ghost by outsmarting it, just as a shaman would. But of course, the monk would attribute victory to Buddhist power. For example, there are folk tales of wise lamas pacifying angry mountain spirits, or even banishing plague demons. The structure is that of a typical Mongolian hunter versus demon tale, but the hero uses sutras and relics instead of arrows and drums. Through countless such tales told in yurts and monasteries alike, the Mongols reconciled the old religion and the new, creating a unique spiritual folklore. In any case, by the end of the 19th century, the Mongols had come to see themselves as special custodians of a pure Buddhism, in part due to these indigenized legends. Of course, the power of folklore lies not just in the themes, but in how the stories are actually told. Oral storytelling is a true performance art in itself, characterized by its distinct styles, structures, and techniques that are perfected over centuries. Professional epic storytellers, known traditionally as tulche, epic singers, or uligerche, tale reciters, hold in memory astonishing quantities of poetry and prose. In the Mongolian Tule epic song tradition, a single performance can run hundreds or even thousands of lines long. It's not uncommon for an expert performer to chant through the night. Legends even claim that one inner Mongolian bard, Mu Okin, could recite an uliger continuously for months on end. Well, alliterative verse is the hallmark of Mongolian epic poetry and many folk tales. Much like ancient Germanic and Turkic poems, Mongolian bards string together lines where successive words begin with the same sound, creating a rolling rhythmic effect that aids memorization and mesmerizes the listener. These verses are often delivered in a melodic chant, somewhere between speaking and singing. Traditional performers accompany themselves on musical instruments, typically the morin kur, that is the horsehead fiddle, or the tovshur, the two-stringed lute, kind of like an erhu in the Chinese tradition. The music shows the mood too, soft, eerie when a hero prays on a mountain top, thunderous when armies clash, lively and quick during the witty exchanges. And as the UNESCO heritage description notes, if you want to go and take a look at that, which is interesting that this is all listed under UNESCO heritage, an epic singer's skill lies in combining singing, vocal improvisation, and musical accompaniment with this dramatic storytelling. And indeed, performances often include spontaneous improvisation. No two recitations of an epic are exactly the same. The storyteller may expand or contract episodes, insert local references, or just adjust the tale for the audience's liking, all while maintaining the core narrative of the story. And this flexibility is one of the reasons why oral epics have survived for so long. They could adapt to the times, and if you adapt, you survive. A distinctive feature of the Mongolian oral style is the use of formulaic phrases and parallelism. Stock epithets and repeated descriptions abound, giving the tales a poetic grandeur and aiding the bard's memory. For example, a legendary horse might always be introduced as swift as the wind, with hoofs that never weary. A hero introduced as strong of body, wise of mind, favored by eternal heaven. Such repeated formulas not only embellish the story a bit, but also connect it to a larger body of steppe epic tradition, where listeners recognize and savor these familiar tropes. Mongolian epics often begin with lengthy benedictions or yorol, that is, auspicious chants that bless the occasion, and magtal, elaborate praises of the landscape or heroes. It's common for a narrator to open with a poetic invocation of the vast steppe, the sacred mountains, ancestors, setting that reverent tone. An epic poem might open, for instance, quote, "On the great grass ocean of the steppe, under the eternal blue sky, there lived," so on and so on, immediately setting the audience in this mythic space, but of course reminding them of home too. According to descriptions, a Mongol epic can seemingly blend benedictions, charms, folk songs, eulogies, and narratives together, reflecting how the oral storyteller borrows from many genres of oral literature to enrich the performances. So really you get not just a story, but this encapsulation of Mongol cultural expression. You get a story, song, and a ritual, all in one. Storytelling sessions traditionally occurred during social gatherings, winter evenings in the Gur, celebratory feasts or community events. Epics were commonly performed at weddings, the Nadam sports festival, a child's first haircut ceremony, and other important occasions. At such times, the role of the storyteller was also that of a cultural custodian and entertainer-in-chief. The audience, ranging from children to elders, would often participate by humming along refrains or reacting vocally to exciting segments. In more everyday contexts, shorter folk tales or fables were told by grandparents or to grandchildren as bedtime stories, or shared by herders passing time during long travels. The shorter tales have their own flavor too. They usually begin with a standard opening formula equivalent to, what we have in our traditions, once upon a time in such or such place, this kind of thing, which in Mongolian might be a flowery phrase about an imaginary land, kind of like what we had about the great green sky of the steppe, this kind of thing. Of course, it often ends with the satisfying moral or the classic living happily ever after, which Mongolian storytellers used to neatly conclude the fantasy and return listeners to reality. Close your eyes and go to sleep now, that kind of thing. Well, the use of such conventional openings and closings is pretty common, but it frames the story as fiction and signals to the audience when to applaud and when to finally suspend their disbelief, I suppose. Well, crucially, Mongolian oral storytelling has always valued interactivity, memory, and even a bit of the occasional improvisation, rather than having this strict adherence to a set script. And this is why variations of the same folk tale can be found across Mongolia and even in the wider Mongol diaspora. So that is in Inner Mongolia and China, Buryatia and Kalmykia. Each variant, of course, is shaped by the teller's personality, but also the community's input. Even when Mongolian epics and tales began to be written down, the oral versions kept evolving. For instance, when printed woodblock editions of King Geser's epic appeared in the 1700s, bards did not simply recite them verbatim. Instead, they absorbed the new material and integrated it with their oral improvisation. The oral tradition remained primary, with the written text just as one influence among many. It's fluid, it's performative. That is the nature of Mongolian storytelling. It is a unique stylistic feature. It's dynamic, highly adaptive, and very communal, and that enables the folklore to survive the dramatic changes in Mongolian life. Of course, there's a broad array of genres within Mongolian folklore, and it each has its own typical characters and motives. You might recognize a few of them. We often categorize folk tales into several types, notably animal tales, magical tales, heroic epics, domestic tales, and also those little satirical anecdotes. Now, these categories help us understand the varied functions of the tales, all the way from imparting moral lessons to simply just having a laugh. So first we have animal parables and fables. In these sorts of stories, wild and domestic animals speak and behave like humans, often to poke fun and satirize human follies. And they are, of course, completely allegorical. The humans, rather the animals, stand in for human types, and their interactions carry these moral or practical lessons. A classic example is the story of the silly wolf. In this popular fable, a hungry wolf is outwitted by a clever horse and even a piece of entrails, a comedic chain of trickery that leaves the wolf empty-handed, and in some versions, perhaps for the older kids, leaves him dead. In any case, the wolf laments his own stupidity. You see, the wolf allegorizing greed and foolishness is repeatedly duped because of his impatience and gullibility. Each time the cunning horse gives him another absurd task. Clean me off, read the letter on my hoof, etc. And all the naivety of the wolf leads to his downfall. Mongolian animal tales like this use humor to teach wisdom. The message is that wit and ingenuity can triumph over that brute strength. It's a fitting lesson for nomadic people, often relying on their cleverness to survive in those harsh conditions. Common figures include the fox, often portrayed as a sly trickster who can talk anyone, or perhaps any beast, into or out of anything. The wolf, as noted, symbolizes rapacity and foolish hubris. The rabbit or the hare typically is the quick-witted underdog. The camel, the horse, and other livestock, they're usually kind but sometimes naive. It represents the honest, common folk. Of course, all the characters resonate with the Mongolians' experiences. For instance, herders know the wolf as a literal threat to their flocks. So seeing a wolf get, humbled in this manner is certainly as instructive as it is satisfying. But then we have the magical and wondrous tales. These are the closest things to fairy tales in a Western sense. They involve elements of magic, transformations, monsters, and of course faraway journeys. Their protagonists are often princes, kings, or warriors, quite legendary ones who encounter fantastical beings like dragons or mangus, that is, multi-headed ogres, talking birds, or perhaps even sorcerers. In one such tale, the tale of the golden and silver ankle bones, a young hero is aided by an 8-legged flying horse on a quest to defeat evil, showing how otherworldly helpers and enemies certainly populate the genre too. Mongolian magical tales frequently reflect the shamanic cosmology. Heroes may travel between the human world, that is the upper world, Tengri's heavens, and the lower world, spirit or underworld, in the course of their adventure. They might also consult shamans or receive protective blessings from holy figures. Of course, after Buddhism took root, some magical tales took on a more Buddhist sort of bent. For example, a wandering monk might play the role that a fairy godmother or wizard does in European tales, providing the magical aid or wisdom that the hero needs. Monsters and demons are common villains too, reflecting both the physical dangers of the steppe and the spiritual dangers as understood in folk religion. But ultimately, these tales emphasize virtues like courage, humility, and perseverance. A hero may rescue the Khan's kidnapped daughter, or find a magical cure for some illness racking the land, or simply just provide his worthiness to rule by overcoming some supernatural trial. And speaking of which, the next category we have are the legendary and heroic epics. These are the apex of Mongolian folklore, long narratives often in poetic form, celebrating the deeds of cultural heroes and, of course, the legendary kings too. The Mongols share a broader Central Asian epic tradition with the Turkic peoples, but they have distinct national epics such as the Epic of Geser and Epic of Jangar, as well as many localized epics about Mongol Khans and warriors. These epics serve as repositories of collected memory and identity, recounting how great leaders founded lineages, defeated enemies, and upheld justice. For instance, Jangar centers on Khan Jangar and his band of heroes defending the idyllic kingdom of Bumba against giants and invaders. It's a story that likely echoes real historical struggles of the Oirat Mongols, but cast in fantastical terms. Similarly, the secret history of the Mongols, though a chronicle, reads like an epic of Genghis Khan, complete with his heroic youth, the loyal companions, the betrayals, the battles, and the eventual unification of the tribes under heaven's mandate. Common features of the epics include genealogies, to trace the hero's royal or even divine ancestry, prophecies, and also grand combat scenes described in rich metaphorical language. Heroes are celebrated for embodying Mongolian virtues, strength, batar, that is the word for heroic valor, leadership tempered with generosity, and an almost superhuman connection to the natural and spiritual worlds. They often wield legendary weapons or ride exceptional horses, and indeed the centrality of the horse in Mongolian life is reflected in epics, where the hero's steed is a character in its own right. But the villains in epics, well, they might be human adversaries, whether they be rival Khans, cruel tyrants, or just monstrous beings. Defeating someone like that usually requires divine aid, and that reinforces the theme that the hero's right to rule comes from a higher supernatural order. Now, importantly, these epic tales were not only entertainment, but they were education. They transmuted a sense of history, ethical principles, and tribal codes of honor to the listeners. Always a deeper meaning behind it. And of course, when epics were performed at community gatherings, they reminded everyone of their shared heritage and the ideals that their ancestors lived by, or sometimes died by, depending on the day. But not all Mongolian folktales are about kings and magic. Let's talk about those witty tales, the domestic ones. Now, these narratives and anecdotes portray clever individuals, often of humble background, outsmarting others or navigating a tricky social situation. They're typically short and comedic, with a clear punchline or perhaps even an ironic twist. Of course, there's plenty of them, but one example is the tale of the witty daughter-in-law. In this story, a Khan's son is foolish, so the Khan brings a renowned clever girl into the family by marrying her off to his son. The clever daughter-in-law then proceeds to solve problems that stumped the court, often by turning the tables on those who originally thought themselves to be superior. There is one version where the Khan poses riddles to test her wit, which she answers with ingenious, humorous solutions. thereby saving her dim-witted husband from disgrace. This and similar tales celebrate the underdog's intelligence and the value of quick thinking, but they also carry an undercurrent of social satire. Bureaucrats, greedy rich men, or arrogant nobles are shown up by the poor shepherds or sharp-tongued old women. Mongolian humor tends to be earthy and direct. For instance, there are trickster tales of the sly fox deceiving a pompous bear, or fooling a vain wolf, ostensibly animal tales, of course, but clearly poking fun at human vanity and gullibility. There's also morality tales of husbands and wives, where one teaches the other a lesson, such as a lazy man who is taught the value of work by his industrious wife by tricking him in a comedic way. These domestic folk tales likely served as both amusement during daily life, but also a subtle means of social critique. It reinforced norms of cleverness, fairness, and humility. Of course, a nomadic society had little tolerance for fools in power or for selfishness, and the folklore makes this clear with its sharp satire of such traits. In all these genres, Mongolian storytellers employ vibrant characters and archetypes that resonate deeply with their audience. Whether it's archetypal wise old shamans guiding heroes, the tragic orphan turned king, the talking fox who acts as a kind of a trickster but also a mentor, or perhaps the fearsome Khan himself who has to learn a lesson in compassion and humility. The characters are drawn in bold strokes, and they make the tales memorable. Many characters recur across stories in different guises, showing the interconnected nature of this folklore. Just a quick example, the figure of an orphaned boy of great destiny is quite common. Genghis Khan himself is portrayed as orphaned, an outcast boy who through courage and help from heaven rises to be, well, we all know Genghis Khan, right? The top job. Well, this reflects a cultural theme of the outsider hero, who earns leadership not by birthright alone, but by fate and virtue. Another recurring figure is the trickster, who uses wit to expose the foolishness of others, another gentle reminder in a communal society that intelligence can come from anywhere, and of course, pride often precedes a fall. Of course, for Mongolians and pretty much every culture on Earth, folklore is much more than just simple stories, but rather a vessel of identity. It's a medium through which the collective memory and values are transmitted and ultimately reinforced. In a land of vast distances and historically scattered tribes, a shared corpus of legends, epics, and folk tales helped bind the Mongolian people with a sense of common origin and destiny. Epics, in particular, functioned as a national narrative. It taught each generation what it really means to be Mongol. Through the heroic epics, Mongolians learned about the glory days of their ancestors, the unity forged by Genghis Khan, the fearless expansion under his descendants, and in a format that was inspiring and engaging, not the dry history that, well, maybe you get that from other channels, but not here. In any case, the epic tales immortalize not just individual heroes, but the heroic history of the Mongolian people and core values. And these epic recitations serve to transmit historical knowledge and societal values to younger generations, and that strengthens awareness of national pride, identity, and unity, but also a nomadic code of ethics and world view, especially during periods when foreign domination or social upheaval threatened to erase them. For example, under Qing rule and later Soviet influence, much of Mongolian high culture and religion was either suppressed or transformed. Yet, folklore, being an oral and grassroots phenomenon, persisted in families and rural communities. Even when written literature or religious practice was curtailed, elders could still tell the ancient tales to children, thus quietly keeping alive a sense of Mongolness, suppose we can use that term. Now, many proverbs and folk sayings attributed to Genghis Khan, whether truly his or apocryphal, certainly remain in everyday use. Well, for example, if you lack unity, anyone can break you like a single arrow. United, you are unbreakable like the bound arrows. We heard that one in Anan Koa's story. Folklore-derived aphorisms and lessons showed loyalty, courage, and respect for elders, and ultimately harmony with nature. And those are all key aspects of the Mongolian identity. And the Mongolian word Batar, hero, so central in epics, became a common part of personal names, and even the name of the capital city, Ulaanbaatar, which actually means red hero, a linguistic testament in all definitions of how deeply the concept of the epic hero is infused in the national consciousness. Folklore's influence on identity is perhaps most poignantly seen in the Mongols' relationship to their land and environment. Through tales and songs, certain mountains, rivers, and valleys became almost sacred national symbols. The story of the blue wolf and fallow doe sanctified the Onon River and the Burgan Khaldun Mountains as cradles of the nation. Other legends about miraculous events like the stone image of Mahakala, protecting the Mongols in battle by frightening their enemies, reinforced again the idea that the spirits of the land actively safeguard Mongol sovereignty. Certainly it gives them a spiritual claim to their homeland. Even in modern times, many Mongolians feel a profound spiritual connection to nature, in part thanks to the folklore that casts the native landscape as a living participant in their lives, not just a nice-looking background. But of course, folklore keeps the Mongolian language rich and vibrant. Idioms and poetic expressions from centuries-old epics are still used in daily conversations, or even in modern literature and music. It creates a cultural continuity that links Mongolians today with the old ancestors, and they're certainly hanging on to it, very proudly so. During the socialist 20th century, there was, admittedly, an attempt to downplay the more feudal cultural elements, as they would say, and epic performances declined due to suppression of shamanic and aristocratic traditions. However, many folk tales, especially those with clear moral or humorous content, were still told within families, and they subtly maintained a sense of national distinctness. By the late 20th and early 21st century, there has been a conscious revival of interest in folklore as a key of Mongolian identity. The Democratic Revolution of 1990 led to a cultural renaissance, where epics and folk festivals finally regained their honor. The Mongolian government and cultural organizations have also taken steps to safeguard the heritage, recognizing it as a crucial part of the nation's intangible cultural heritage. Competitions for epic singers are now held, and prizes are awarded. Now this encourages young people to actually learn the old epics too. Folklore ensembles perform at national celebrations like Nadam, and schools include legends and folk songs in their curriculum. These efforts stem from the understanding that in this rapidly changing and modern world, Mongolia's folklore anchors the national identity. It provides a source of pride, distinct from the country's powerful neighbors, a wellspring of wisdom for addressing contemporary issues, though, of course, through the old-age lessons of these tales, and of course a cultural touchstone that unites Mongolians across regions, and even across the diaspora. Moreover, folklore continues to shape identity on a personal and community level. Many Mongolians recall proverbs or a favorite folktale told by a grandparent that influenced their outlook on life. The hospitality, for which the Mongolians are famous for, by the way, is reinforced by countless folktales praising generosity and punishing the miserly. The respect for elders and for keeping one's word, it's critical in a nomadic honor culture, and it's illustrated in stories of foolish young men who ignore advice and suffer, or clever old women whose wisdom comes along and saves the day. Even that famed Mongolian sense of humor and resilience can be traced partly to the witty folk tales that encourage laughing at hardship and using one's wits to overcome difficulties. So, really, it's a cultural DNA. It shows what it means to be a Mongolian. And each tale, whether it's a world-conquering hero or just a talking fox, it carries a piece of that national soul with it. Well, that is it for the Mongolian side of things. A pretty good tradition, I think. And it's interesting because with the Mongolian side of it, it's this mixture of, not the general nomadic lifestyle, the historical memory, but also the native shamanism and the not-so-native Buddhism. It's interesting, I think. But still, there's a pretty distinct Mongolian voice that speaks out, reverent of the sacred blue sky, and earthy in its humor as well. It celebrates the independent spirit of the heroes, but it also stresses those community bonds and moral duties. It certainly has a lot in common with other folklore traditions. But yes, like I said, the stylistic artistry of the storytelling as well makes it quite unique. It has its own chant, its own music, and well, because of that, rather than writing, well, that's the reason why we have these tales now, and the reason why they're so memorable and moving, capable of being passed down through centuries and centuries of change. And yes, of course, it's subject to a little bit of change after that time. I mean, we're talking hundreds of years, but the key stories are still there. And that's the most important part anyway. Now, I will recommend some music for you. When we speak about oral storytelling in Mongolian folklore, I'm reminded of Nine Treasures, a band from Inner Mongolia in China. And they do sing in Mongolian. They're all ethnic Mongolians. And there's a great song that they have called Praise for a Fine Horse. It's essentially two people arguing back and forth in Mongolian, one trying to buy the horse off the other, and the other one saying, well, if it's so good, well, why should I sell it to you? That kind of thing. It's interesting, so go and look up Nine Treasures, Praise for a Fine Horse. Now, before we go, I'm going to thank the top-tier patrons and subscribers. That's Kimberly, Christine, Sally, Ember, Susan, Cameron, Kerry, Charlene, Lynn, Therese, Katiana, Nicholas, Ulfenir, Alexander, Charles, Christine, Dr. Neuro Nerd, Erin, Jaden, Jim, Jeffrey, Jessica, Madeline, Melissa, Orthodox Review, Scott, Shell, Wendy, Josie, Sarah, Ryan, Thor, Cameron, Stefan, Kevin, HMSHH, Crystal, Dalvery, Anthony, Lucy, Brandon, Gugu Bubonic, Nicholas, Craig, Neftis, Alexander, Gokhan, Dorsey, Vanita, Claire, Courtesy, Carol, Robert, Mary, Bridget, Nefertari, Yvette, Miss Mochi, 11, Allison, Free American. Love saying that name. Jennifer, Brittany, David, Cody, Brian, Are You My Mum? Rhonda, Carrie, Catty B, and Lovely. All right. Well, that's enough for me today, and if you're enjoying this folklore series, well, make sure that you follow along with the playlist and share it around with your friends, but also leave me your thoughts in the comments. What do you think about Mongol folklore? Very cool. All right, everyone, that's enough from me tonight, and I will see you when you feel like returning. Good night, and farewell for now. Lots of love to you all.